track to get back to normalcy at all of our operations. One of the other items I'd like to talk about is that there have been erroneous reports in the press that reports that NTEC is behind in its taxes or royalty payments as part of the Cloud Peak asset acquisition. I am pleased to state that that's incorrect. We have come to agreement with all the taxing agencies, the counties, and the state and federal for both taxes and royalties for payment plans. We are current on those payment of all taxes per our agreements. We have never, ever been behind on any payment of all those taxes, on any of those taxes and royalties. We have one county left in Montana that we're finalizing an agreement with them and should have that shortly. In addition, is that during the same time frame, we reached an agreement with our sureties to provide the necessary reclamation bonding for the new mines. We are now finalizing those agreements, and once we post the collateral required for those sureties, we'll get the bonds issued by the sureties, and then the permits will transfer. So all in all, is that we are now approximately 8 months into the acquisition of the Cloud Peak assets, and I'm very, very pleased to report that the acquisition and the takeover has gone very well. The employees are very, very happy and are excited about the prospects of NTEC owning the operations, and that we've got a good plan moving forward. Is that we also have, during the same time frame, renegotiated several of our major contracts, both with current vendors and suppliers, but also some companies who provide services for our export business, and we've reduced the costs of our export coal, which is a key aspect of our Spring Creek operation. I will leave it at our report as of now. Is it certainly open for any questions? But Chairman McLaughlin, I turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Speaker Damon, apologies again earlier for misspeaking. That concludes our operations report at the time. Speaker Damon.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin, and thank you, Mr. Mosley, for that update. Right now, colleagues, is there anyone that'd like to speak questions on the operational update?
Delegate Daniel So.
Chairman So, go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker, Chairman of the Nabi Committee, and then Board Chair McLaughlin and CEO Mosley. Basically, in the report on the operations, what does each of the mines, what is the cost to basically get a ton of coal to each of the markets? Each of the 3 mines in Montana and Wyoming, as well as Navajo mine. that would basically my first question in array of other questions that I'll pose throughout the work session. Thank you, Speaker.
Okay. Is there any other comments, questions?
Speaker, this is Council Delegate Charles Newton.
Okay, go ahead. Madam Chair Charles Newton, then I'll come back to you, Mr. McLaughlin, you and your team after Madam Chair.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Mosley. My first question is, how many of your customers have filed for the force majeure, and how much will it cost the company? And then also, for your taxes that are owed, how much do you still owe in taxes, and how is NTEC paying off that amount? And then my last question is, I've asked this question several times. The employees that you talk about that are currently employed in the mines out in the north, can you tell me how many of those are Navajo? I'd like to know that and hopefully get a response back, because I think when this mine deal was presented to us, there was a push that there would be Navajo employees there, but I have yet to receive that answer. In addition to that, I've also asked at a shareholders meeting how many of the employees or how many of your board members are, like, what are their terms for, I guess, I want to say maybe revoting, or when does their term expire? And then my last question, or I've got two more questions. One question is in regards to your attorneys. You are still doing business with the Navajo people, so how many of those employees how many of your attorneys are Navajo barred? And then my last question is, I recently received a shareholder's check, which I'd never received before, so I did have questions about it. I'm assuming it's a shareholder's check, but it was very interesting that on that check, it says that NTEC is in Wyoming. I thought NTEC was a Navajo-owned business. I thought that they had a office on the Navajo Nation. And also where your company currently is doing business out of. I've driven by a couple of times the office here in Farmington. I don't believe that your office is there, so I want to know where you're working and why it's not on the Navajo Nation. Thank you.
Those two questions are actually questions from Chairman Daniel So and Madam Chair Charles Newton. Mr. McLaughlin, I'll go ahead and refer back to you and your team members.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. I think that a combination of Mr. Mosley and Mr. Masters can answer a lot of the specific questions posed by Chairman So and Madam Chair Charles Newton. Let's see. I think that's what we'll do. And I may interject as appropriate, but I'll turn it over to Clark and Mr. Masters.
Okay, thank you, Chairman McLaughlin. I probably will miss some of these, and General Counsel Bernard Masters will fill in on some of these. The question about cost of coal or sales price of coal, that varies considerably. The comment was the cost of coal to our customers is that all of these sales contracts are between NTEC and our customers and are confidential. And so is that as this is an extremely competitive business, I don't believe we can provide that information, as they vary considerably from each mine and from each customer. We have over 70 different customers that we supply coal to throughout the country and also internationally. So that's a very difficult question to answer, and it becomes extremely complicated, and is also one in which our customers greatly respect the confidentiality of. I would defer, Bernard, to some of Delegate Charles Newton's question. I will say we do pay each one of our member representatives a stipend when they attend a meeting, and so each member rep receives that stipend for each one of the meeting sessions that we have. And as we are a company that is fairly large, both domestically and internationally, we have various different departments scattered throughout the country. And so is our accounts payable function for the company comes out of our Cordero Rojo mine in Wyoming, where we have some of our accounts payable personnel. We also have an office in Farmington that supports all of our operations and dealings on the Navajo Reservation and off the Navajo Reservation in northwestern New Mexico. I will also defer to Bernard to talk about our legal domicile and where that is. I will just turn this over to Bernard, and he can fill in on some of the questions about Navajo Bar and some of the other questions that were asked.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Honorable delegates, this is Bernard Masters. As previously noted, I'm the General Counsel for NTEC. To go through a number of the questions, there was a question about how many customers have filed force majeure, and perhaps just for the benefit of the delegates, the issue that I think is being asked about is the pandemic itself is being construed or argued to be a force majeure event. In other words, something that would ordinarily excuse a company from meeting its contractual obligations. So as I understood the question, have we seen customers of ours who have orders for coal invoke force majeure to avoid taking some part or all of an order that they are committed to take? And the answer is yes. And in fact, it's in the coal space, it is not just pandemics that trigger force majeure notifications from customers. It's often used for a host of other excuses as to why customers may decide to shift their orders. So I would say, I don't have the exact number, but most of our customers who have reduced their take or purchase of coal since the start of the pandemic have sent us force majeure notices. So in other words, telling us that due to the pandemic and other issues, they are reducing or changing their coal purchases. There was a question about how we have resolved the tax obligation that we have assumed. The basic answer to that is each of the agreements that Mr. Mosley referenced with the counties and the state and the federal government vary in some respects. With respect to the taxes, they're very similar, and in general, the way to summarize it is we have been given 5-year payment plans with no interest in order to make the tax payment that, again, Cloud Peak had failed to make in the bankruptcy and that we had assumed going forward. So those are very beneficial terms for us as a company to have the benefit of that time to make the payments and not incur interest. There is a question related to how many employees in our Powder River Basin are Navajo. One of the difficulties that we have encountered in reviewing our the Cloud Peak data and employee information is that the typical designation that you can make as an employee as far as identifying yourself by race or ethnicity only provides whether you are Native American or not. It does not provide tribal affiliation. So one of the changes that we are currently actually have underway in our HR information system is to expand the choice available to employees so that if they choose, they can not only identify themselves as Native American, but they can also identify their tribal affiliation. So at this point, we have limited information as to the total number of Navajo in the workforce. And again, that's of course separate and apart from the workforce at Navajo Mine that is employed by BISTI. The reference, there was a question, Honorable Charles Newton, you were asking about the check. Mr. Mosley was exactly correct. That is your stipend as a member rep for attending a member rep meeting. So there's and you are entitled to that check in response to every meeting that you do attend. Of course, purely voluntary, purely optional on your part. But as a company, we wanted to tender that check just as we attempted to do at the last meeting before. So that is the explanation for that check. As Mr. Mosley explained, we have a finance department that is based in Gillette, and we have finance teams elsewhere. But as far as actually cutting the check, it's cut out of an account that is based in Wyoming, and that's the reference. We do, of course, continue to maintain our headquarters on the Navajo Nation, but we have the ability under our... Sorry? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
yes, please continue.
Okay, sorry. We maintain our headquarters, but our operating agreement provides us with the ability to establish offices and operate outside of the Navajo Nation. Our Farmington office is a perfect example of that. It is not on the nation, and our offices in Broomfield obviously are not either. But our headquarters do remain for purposes of our registration and service of process, et cetera, do remain within the Navajo Nation. And that hopefully I've answered the questions that were raised.
Bernard, this is Tim McLaughlin. Speaker Damon may add on a little bit too as well.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Going back to Madam Chair Charles Newton's questions regarding employing Navajos. I believe that NTEC has held a job fair in Kayenta. And also, I'm aware that NTEC has advertised any job openings or just job openings in general with the specific idea of targeting miners who may not have a job in the Black Mesa area. Not just for the Montana and Wyoming mines, but it's also for the Navajo mine as well. And I'm aware of a number of employees that we have taken who have lost their jobs, been able to find them jobs at Navajo mine. Regarding board member terms, all board member terms are currently are current. We have a member rep meeting scheduled this Saturday, and we can discuss the staggered terms with you then if you so choose.
Chairman McLaughlin, this is Clark. Let me just add one more comment about the job fair and the postings of jobs.
Please.
It is that Speaker Damon and honorable delegates we have advertised all of our open positions throughout the Navajo Nation, both through online applications and through various other means. We've had several displaced workers from the Kayenta Black Mesa area apply. Some have taken a job up in Wyoming, but I think you all can understand is that their heart is back with their families, back on the nation, and they have is that we've been able to accommodate one employee that has wanted to go back to the nation, and that employee will transfer over from our operations to our contractor operations at Navajo Mine in the next couple months. So is that we've reached out, we've tried to recruit, we've been somewhat successful. But is that and we continue to recruit as time goes on. However, with the current situation is that we still we have over 200 plus employees that are laid off, and some of those have been furloughed, and we need to fill those positions first. Is that the other comment that General Counsel Bernard Masters commented on about the force majeure and the impact is that we reported to the Navajo Nation for their requests about impacts of COVID-19. And we stated earlier in this presentation is over $34 million of lost sales due to COVID-19. A majority of those were force majeure declarations by our customers. Thank you, Chairman McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Madam Chair, Charles Newton, you also asked a question about Navajo licensed attorneys that work for NTEC. This is an appropriate question for Bernard Masters, but I am aware of at least 2 of our outside contractors who maintain an active Navajo Nation bar license. Bernard, can you confirm?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Speaker Damon, we defer to you.
Hey, thank you very much for referring back to questions from my colleagues here. With that, I don't have anybody else in the queue right now. Is there any more questions about operations?
This is Delegate Crotty with the question.
Okay, well, let me go back to Madam Chair Charles Newman for a follow-up. Then I'll come over to you, Madam Chair Amber Crotty. Madam Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker. So really quickly, I was taking a few notes, and I did ask how many customers filed for force majeure, and the explanation, a long explanation was given, but there was never an exact number of how many customers currently have filed for force majeure. Also, I asked how much taxes are still owed, and there was mention of a 5-year payment plan, but there was never any answer given as to how much taxes NTEC has taken on as a result of the purchases of the mines up north. You also went into the, the explanation. You mentioned where your legal domicile, and then you also talked about your headquarters, and then you also talked about where you're incorporated. Those all have legal ramifications to the way that these questions are answered. And I know that according to Mr. Mosley, it sounds like you do have some offices in Wyoming, which is how I was able to, obviously get the shareholders check from Wyoming. How much of your work is actually done on the nation? And that is a concern for me because, again, legal domicile versus incorporation versus the residency, and then also, where you guys are, where your headquarters is. Those are all terms that have been used, and there hasn't been a clear explanation. So perhaps you can just be straightforward and just tell us how much work is being done on the Navajo Nation. And then the last one is, where exactly is your office? If I wanted to come and visit and do a surprise visit, am I expected to go to Wyoming or Montana? Or do you have offices on the Navajo Nation where I could have a one-on-one conversation with Mr. Mosley, like I do with NTEC, like I do with NAPI, like I do with NECA, like I do with NAPI? All are always willing to come in and invite delegates. But with the offices in NTEC here in Farmington, every time I've gone by, there's never anybody there. I've peeked in a couple of times. There's been one secretary or one person at the front. I did ask and I inquired where Mr. Mosley's office was, and the answer that I received is it's not here. So, Mr. Mosley, where exactly is your office? Thank you.
Let me go back to our before I can come back to you, Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Mosley. Madam Chair, Naabik'iyati.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. I apologize. My phone is being serviced. I wasn't able to text you to request to speak, so thank you for the acknowledgement. So, colleagues, good afternoon, and I appreciate the update from NTEC. I think what I'm going to request from the company is the council and our committees, we do have shareholder reps. But I would encourage the company and all of the other enterprise to courtesy copy the Navajo Nation Council in its entirety so that we can be updated on what are some of the issues and concerns of the company, but also keeping updated on what are some of the current possibilities, and especially as we move forward with the COVID. The Budget and Finance Committee, we're now receiving practically a weekly update on the status of oil and gas and the market. I think it would be in our best interest to also know the dynamic of the coal market during COVID to understand if there's any federal funding that's coming down the line. And if this question was not asked, I would want to know if the company was able to secure the PPP funding to assist with your employers' the employees' salaries. So with that being said, I also want to remind my colleagues my personal stance in terms of shareholders and being a shareholder last council for the Navajo Nation Oil and Gas. I agree that that stipend to me is problematic, and I would ask my colleagues to actually decline that stipend. And it is possible because I never received a stipend from Navajo Nation Oil and Gas. And I think if we could have that conversation, Speaker, at one point, I know last council we were given by one of the lawyers, I think Mr. Lee, he was able to provide us a background on the duties and responsibilities of the shareholders, and also the duties and responsibilities of then that role as a shareholder, and then how they share that information either with the oversight committee that they represent or the Navajo Nation. So it's my understanding through our role as delegates representing the people that they're receiving that information as a shareholder rep. And so I'm looking at how then is that information being filtered down. And so the company can have one perspective, but I would appreciate my colleagues who are representing not only this enterprise or really any enterprise to share that information as, to me, I believe that's critical to the role. I do want to state then, and I think Delegate Charles Newton raised a very critical question in terms of the location of the company and the jurisdiction and whether and how that impacts sovereign immunity. And so I would also want a quick scan, Speaker, of other enterprises that are not located on Navajo Nation. And I know that Diné Development Corporation at one point was located back east, and through pressure by the council and Navajo leadership, they were relocated to Albuquerque, which is still off the nation. But I believe we should understand what that dynamic looks like in terms of jurisdiction and in terms of our liability to the nation. So I would like to get those questions answered and see how the company can provide information to all delegates. It's as easy as emailing Navajo Nation, 24 NNC something at Navajo-nsn.gov, and I think that would help with the transparency and the accountability. Thank you, Speaker. Are you on the NTEC call? Is there any issue with them, or what's why are they reporting?
Thank you. Madam Chair. Everybody.
Yeah.
What we can do is
Speaker.
I know. So I think if they just give us information and we could read it, and we could come up with our own.
Confidential information.
They should. We could go in executive session. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
So there's your Amber. Put your phone on silent or mute.
Am I not on mute?
No. Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear your whole conversation.
Oh, good. I hope that.
Chair, this is Chief Oshana. So.
Yeah, Speaker, I'm here.
Can you, with the request for all the, Madam Chair, Amber Crotty is asking for us to get an update of all the locations for all the Navajo Nation enterprises.
It'll work.
So let's go ahead and get that from all the, let's reach out to all the enterprises for that, and we can get that information out to all my colleagues on the council. So with that, let me go back to Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Mosley. I think there were some questions directed towards you, both from Madam Chair Charles Newton and also from Madam Chair Amber Crotty.
Speaker, after they respond, I'd like to get I'd like to do follow-up questions.
Okay.
Delegate Daniel So.
Okay. Well, when they come back, I do have Honorable Slater, and then I can come to you, Honorable Chairman. So let me go back to NTEC. Mr. Laughlin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Madam Chair Crotty, we can certainly work to get the council updates the COVID-19 and economic impacts of NTEC, and we'll work. This will be an agenda item that we can talk about with our member reps on Saturday to see if we can have an efficient way of getting this done with their thoughts and their buy-in as well. So we'll appreciate your comments, and we'll work with our member reps to establish something. In terms of the exact questions posed by Madam Chair Charles Newton, Bernard Masters, can you do you have the ability to answer Madam Chair Charles Newton's questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is Bernard Masters. On the tax question, I can't give you to the dollar, but what I can say is the original assumption of taxes, in other words, the amount that effectively was part of the purchase price for these assets of delinquent taxes that Cloud Peak had failed to pay, was approximately $73 million. And we are on 5-year payment plans on that full amount, essentially across all of the jurisdictions. So we're very early in the repayment process, but we, as Mr. Mosley emphasized, we are very much current with those payments. I would also add that those are simply the delinquent payments that were owed by Cloud Peak. We are fully current and up to date and have no payment plan or anything like that associated with our existing and go forward taxes and royalty payments as NTEC itself. So I just want to make sure it's well understood that we're talking about a very defined amount of taxes that related to a delinquency from Cloud Peak. And I would be happy, as Chairman McLaughlin commented, to get that, to the dollar amount ready for the meeting on Saturday. I think with again, we can. I think perhaps the easiest way to address the location questions with respect to our various offices be very easy to provide. Essentially the address list for our operations with the detail as to what occurs in the various offices, and again, have those ready for Saturday. We have been operating off or outside of the nation since the day NTEC established its offices in Farmington. So this is not anything new for NTEC, and Mr. Mosley can comment. I apologize, I just wasn't here at that time as to when exactly those offices were first established in Farmington. There was a question related to whether we have received PPA funding for for payroll support, and we were able in the second tranche that program was rolled out in 2 components. We were able to receive funding. Again, that is purely associated, or that money is to be used solely for purposes of meeting payroll obligations, and so we have sequestered that money for that purpose. It is for us going to be it will be a combination of a loan versus a grant based on the requirements of the program itself, some of which were kind of implemented on the fly, as you can imagine, given the emergency. But at this point, we have received funding under that program. Let's see. I'm just reviewing my notes. I I apologize, Chairman McLaughlin. If I've missed a question, please let me know.
Bernard, I think this is Clark. The one other item was the number of force majeure declarations. We get a report on that. We have probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 different force majeure notices from various customers related to various items, of which right now probably the most is related to COVID, but they also relate to plant outages and other failures of plant equipment or being able to receive coal. We can provide a force majeure report under confidentiality, or at least summarize that when we can.
Thank you, Clark and Bernard. Clark, I think it would be helpful if you opined on the location of NTEC businesses.
Certainly. So for our purposes, we have always maintained our headquarters and registered office on the nation. Again, that is purposes of maintaining jurisdiction in Navajo, and is part of the requirements of our operating agreement is to have a headquarters address in the nation, which we have always done. But our operational offices have been outside of the nation, as I said, since the first office in Farmington was opened a number of years ago. Currently, the way we describe things is we have a corporate office in Broomfield. We have the office that we've always had in Farmington, and then we have other operational offices associated with the various mine sites in Wyoming and Montana. So the corporate offices are in Broomfield, and that is where Clark Mosley is located, to answer the question specifically. So that's the current makeup of our office locations.
And again, this is Clark Mosley. And let me add is that in a normal month-to-month cycle, post-COVID, if you were to look for me, you'll find me probably most anywhere. Is that I'll be either in Farmington or out on Bisti, or with our meetings with APS as it regards Four Corners Power Plant, or at our various other operations in Wyoming and Montana, or visiting with customers. Of course, it's very important, particularly as large as our export business is to have contacts with our customers in both Korea and Japan. So if the question is, where do you find me, is that I can you can almost any location I will be at one time or other during the month. Just also is that our Farmington office is run and managed by Stephen Yazzie, which came to us from SRP. And he's the gentleman, if you were to call on our Farmington office, is to ask for him, and he could certainly report on any NTEC activity.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Speaker Damon.
Thank you. Let me go over to Honorable Slater, and then Chairman Daniel, so you'll be after that. Honorable Slater, floor is yours.
That is one of the most perplexing answers I've ever heard to where your office is located. I think if you ask Tim Cook or one of these CEOs, they'd tell you where their offices are, and that's a part of the brand. And I think that's important for Navajo, any company that we own. My first question is, what percentage of NTEC employees are covered by non-disclosure agreement, and is there a policy that employees must sign them in order to be employed? And the new acquisitions that were made, is it still a prudent investment for NTEC and for the nation? Are those mines in the red, or are they in the black? And if they're in the red, when do you anticipate they'll become profitable? Because it's taken so long and they still have not been obtained, the permits and the bonding for the mines, do you feel that there's any sense that NTEC misled the nation and how easily this could be pulled off absent the nation's participation? And what bankruptcy options are you considering, or were you considering, for the Wyoming and Montana acquisitions? And then in terms of compensation for the board and the CEO, we've received some reports at the council, and there's no sunlight on this issue, but do board of directors make $100,000 per year, and the board chair makes $200,000, and the CEO makes $650,000 per year? And has NTEC contributed to President Trump or any of his political affiliates and entities? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Slater. With that, let me go over to the follow-up question from Chairman So. Chairman Daniel So, are you there?
Yes, go ahead, Cecilia. Delegates of the Navajo Nation Council, the legislative staff, and Mr. Mosley and Chairman McLaughlin, and the legal counsel. But my initial question basically was, what does it cost each of the mines to bring up a ton of coal, whether they want to get it on a rail car and to get it to market? I wasn't talking about the price you sell the coal for. The other aspect, I guess, is each one of the Navajo Nation delegates are shareholders. But from each committee, there is the shareholder reps. So for basically to hide information or wish to not answer direct questions, really you're violating an aspect of an owner. A shareholder owner needs to have the right information. So far, this operating report, we haven't even, the company hasn't divulged the financial loss or profit at each of the mines that they operate, and even here on Navajo mine. The other aspect is regarding almost what Honorable Vice Chair Slater is posing. We had also received information that NTEC took on the environmental bonds of a mine either in Mississippi or Arkansas, of which we knew that Mr. Mosley was a former operator over there in that mine. So the other thing that stymies me is you can find me here, but you can't find me here. That is a perfect example of avoiding a question, an answer to a question. So I don't think you've divulged all of the company holdings that perhaps NTEC has become a part of. And it seems like there is a conglomerate that Mr. Mosley oversees and isn't singularly a part of being CEO of just NTEC. And that's certainly very troubling. As I guess the expectation was we would get more clear answers rather than the aspect of giving answers that would just not be factful. The other is, have you shared the audit reports with even the shareholder representatives? Have you shared it with our folks, Office of the Controller? And again, it goes back to this is a Navajo-owned company. And you have to answer these questions and not jump around it. Thank you, Cecilia, Speaker. Trying to be as direct as Vice Chair Slater. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Daniel. So, thank Honorable Slater for those comments and questions. Let me go back to Mr. McLaughlin and you and your team.
Thank you, Speaker Damon.
Question.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Just to touch on the last comments and questions first, posed by Chairman So. On Saturday, we have a scheduled meeting with the member reps to present our 2019 audited financials. Every year since our inception, we have performed an audit of the company's finances, and every year we've presented those findings in that audit report to the member reps. After that meeting, we send copies, bound copies of that audit, and we've been doing this since 2014 to the President's office as well as the Controller's office. Bernard, I'm likely leaving someone off as well, but that is circulated, and we've been doing that since 2014. And this Saturday we have that scheduled meeting. The audit doesn't hide anything, and again, we've been providing that to the shareholder reps and various components of the nation since our inception. In terms of answering some of Honorable Delegate Slater's direct questions, NTEC has never contributed to Trump. Absolutely not. And in fact, that NTEC has not contributed to any political campaigns since our creation. In terms of board comp, we can certainly talk about that with the member reps, but I can wholeheartedly tell you I do not make $200K holding this position. Absolutely not. Board members do not make $100K a year. Absolutely not. I may have misheard this question. I'll answer it the way I thought I heard it as I was writing notes. I believe the question asked was, what are your bankruptcy options moving forward? We don't have any. There are none. Bankruptcy is not being considered, and that's because the investment was still and is still a prudent investment prior to the COVID-19 impact. The mines were turning a profit, and recall that we didn't actually step into the ownership position until October, late October, and without implementing a new mining plan, without focusing on efficiency, without going out and securing new additional customers, just based on taking and improving the mines generally, just sitting in there and taking it over, these mines were turning a profit to the tune of several $1 million. And of course, we can talk about that. I'll share that. That's in the audit report that we'll present to the member reps this Saturday. And we can certainly talk about that with the member reps. But suffice it to say, these mines were making, without doing anything, and making them better, making them function better, they were turning a profit. Regarding the non-disclosure, regarding the remainder of the questions, I think I'll turn it over to Bernard and Clark as appropriate. Bernard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Slater, there was another question that you had asked with respect to the NDAs, and I do appreciate that question. That is something that I know is becoming an issue of concern, elsewhere across the nation with respect to hiring practices. We do not have NDAs as a condition to employment, and unless there is some very unusual legacy Cloud Peak employee that had an NDA for purposes that I, can't explain, I am unaware of any NDAs that are in place with respect to our workforce. There was a question with respect to the bonding, and do we feel that we have misled the council with respect to the difficulty and the time associated with achieving that bonding? I think what I would say, and the simple answer is, we anticipated and planned for a large number of contingencies upon acquisition, and once it was clear we would need to obtain bonding. I will be the first to admit that a global pandemic was not one of them. We simply did not anticipate the effect, the rapidity of the effect, and how serious that would be, not simply on our revenue, but on the financial markets that we need to access in order to provide the necessary financing required by our bond sureties. So that has taken longer, but the market obviously went into a tailspin. We've continued to work through this entire process. As Mr. Mosley said, we do have agreement with our sureties. We are working very, very diligently to get back into the market to complete what we need to do to get the bonding. But I certainly apologize with respect to the time. We're not happy with that, but this was an experience unlike any other in my lifetime, frankly. And we're simply trying to work through that as quickly as we can. I believe Honorable So had a question with respect to or a reference to whether or not we were a conglomerate or whether there was the possibility that we were hiding assets. I want to be as emphatic, as absolute, and as clear as I can be in answering that question. NTEC has subsidiaries, no holding companies, no corporate structure of any kind other than NTEC itself. We hold all of our assets, including all of the assets that were acquired in the Cloud Peak bankruptcy, under one corporate entity, and that is Navajo Transitional Company, LLC. There are no other assets and no other entities that we own or control. So I really want to be clear and very, very emphatic on that point. All of the assets that were acquired in the bankruptcy are a matter of public record. They are extensively detailed in the court filings. If there's any questions about what we acquired and the assets that are associated with that acquisition, it is all there. But I understand the concern, and I respect the Honorable So's concern about this, but I did want to give a very complete answer that there is nothing other than NTEC, and there is nothing that we're hiding. So I don't want to leave an impression that there is. I will let Mr. Mosley comment. Again, the reference to his being involved in what is called the Sequatchie asset, because I think it's best coming from him. But this, again, seems to be a question that, I think there's some real confusion around this. So I'll let Mr. Mosley himself comment on whether he had any involvement of any kind with that operation.
Thank you, Bernard. This is Clark Mosley, Honorable Delegates, Speaker Damon. Let me just cover one of the other questions, and I'll go back to that assertion that I was involved with the Tennessee properties. Is that the question is about profitability per mine? Is that that was pretty well stated? Is that 2019 we were over, I believe, about $65 million of net income, give or take almost $70 million of net income, of which the Cloud Peak assets contributed about $5 to $6 million of that. As stated with the COVID-19, we had a reduction in sales and impact of over $34 million. So in addition, as we talked about the Navajo mine and the outages at the power plant, we had reduced income from both all of our operations during the first 4 months of this year. We cash flowed. We have no credit facility to pull on, so we made all of the payments to all of our obligations and continued operations during that downturn with a reduction in sales to the Four Corners power plant, plus our other mine sales. Now, given that is that the profitability, I'll be very, very happy to report last month's profitability, all of our mines were in the black and will continue to do so throughout the rest of the year with our projections and forecasts as to what is projected to happen. Actually, is it like I stated, our current run rate for this month is we're 7% over forecast, and we continue to add to that. So this month there'll be a very good month. Getting back to the Sequatchie properties in Tennessee, I really am astounded that people think that I'm involved in any other operation than NTEC. It's a total false accusation. I'm just amazed as to where some of this information could be coming from. But again, is that I'm quite transparent, and the board knows all of my activities and where I've worked and the people I've worked for. And this is just a trumped up false accusation made by detractors of NTEC. And I'll just leave it at that. The question also on cost of coal is that in our Wyoming, Montana operations, because the 8,800 BTU coal is traded in the NYMEX, is that you can pretty much figure that out. But our costs range anywhere from $8 to $10 a ton of coal, depending on the mine and the time, location of where we're at. Our cost of coal in New Mexico is in excess of $25 to $30 a ton because of mining conditions in New Mexico at the Navajo mines considerably different. And then the last thing is that Bernard Masters talked about locations, and he stated that we're all located as far as the executive team in our Broomfield offices, and that's where we all have a job. But again, is that my statement was that we're all over in performing our jobs in service to the company, but we are have our headquarters, as Bernard stated, in Broomfield, but we also have operation satellite offices both in New Mexico and Wyoming. And of course, our legal domicile is on the Navajo reservation. Chairman McLaughlin or Mr. Masters, I think that I don't remember of any other questions, but I certainly probably have missed some. If you guys can backfill.
Clark, Tim, I think you touched on all the questions I had written down. Speaker Bates?
Speaker Damon.
I'm sorry. Do it again. Oh, I'm sorry.
Chairman McLaughlin, this is Clark. Let me just restate what I said here is that our corporate offices are in Broomfield, not our headquarters. I just want to make that clear. Is that the corporate offices where which are a remnant of the Cloud Peak acquisition are in Broomfield, Colorado.
Speaker Damon, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm looking at all my notes here, and I apologize again. We defer to you, sir.
All right, thank you. With that, let me go back. I know there was a follow-up from Honorable Slater.
You Speaker, this is Delegate Slater. Thank you for the responses from the NTEC leadership. I appreciate the direct communication. With respect to any future expansion plans at the assets in Wyoming, how are those moving forward in the regulatory process? I guess that would also include the Montana mines or mine. Have those permits proceeded accordingly? Have there been any hiccups there? And also, the references to the 2019, I think, audit, and I just want to make it clear that we're not talking about a frozen point in time where when you took over the assets, they were profitable or they were profitable on the other company's balance sheet and that moved over to yours. Like, are they presently profitable or have they been adversely impacted by COVID or other market conditions in the current time, not in the 2019 audit?
Hello, Honorable Slater?
Yes, that's it.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. That, I don't have anybody, no one has texted me, colleagues.
Speaker Davis, this is Delegate Yellow here.
I'm Yellow here, go ahead.
Oh, hello, yeah, this is Speaker Damon. Also, my colleague, the 24th Navajo Nation Council, also NTEC. My question is the comparisons of your net income last year and this year. What's the difference not this time? And also, how much are you going to be resort to the Navajo Nation's revenue? And your net income comparison last year and this year. How much is the difference, or how much is or less this year to NTEC? Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin, over at with Honorable Slater and Honorable Yellowhair's questions.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Thank you, Honorable Yellowhair. In terms of the money that the nation receives from NTEC, I am extremely happy, and I'll to state that, and it's something that we'll talk about again on Saturday with the member reps in our audit as well, that last year, in terms of the amount we paid to the nation in taxes and royalties, was the highest since we were created. We paid the nation, I think, roughly $45 million in royalties and taxes, and that is by far our best year. On a normal year, you can typically expect that NTEC will contribute about $37 million annually in royalties and taxes to the nation. I think as a general matter, in terms of what you should expect from NTEC in terms of payments of royalties and taxes, you should expect payments of royalties and taxes to be around $37 million. Bernard, may be appropriate for you to talk about any sort of expansion or regulatory issues, namely as Delegate Slater has identified, or at least has questioned in Montana. And then Clark, it may be helpful to talk a little bit about present profitability and COVID-19 impact. Bernard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable delegates, the planning around the operation of our mines in Montana and Wyoming is really limited to various permitting issues associated with the operations of essentially the existing footprint of the mines themselves. There are places in which we are seeking to move the mining operations long term within our boundaries. But I will let Mr. Mosley also comment. But we don't have significant existing expansion plans that we are dedicating capital resources to with respect to Spring Creek, Cordero, or Antelope. Again, it's more in the nature of various adjustments and amendments to existing permitting and licenses, but it's certainly nothing. I didn't want to leave an impression with the delegates based on the question that we were contemplating expanding or acquiring property associated with those operations. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman McLaughlin, let me just add, I'd just like to reaffirm exactly what Mr. Masters stated about expansion. We look at the market, we look at the future market, we look at is it a 5-year to 10-year plan, and plan accordingly. And is it the current plans are status quo, and really no expansion or any other additional regulatory activities. You may have heard or seen EIS applications but those are for ongoing operations, current operations, and current in our mine plan. Is that there is activities at some of our mines to where there is a lease by application to extend pits or mining operations to meet the current requirements, particularly in Montana because of the way the regulators view NEPA action. So is that those are just not really expansions, but they are applications to maintain the current annual production to meet our projected markets through the life of the mine. So we can get into that quite a bit deeper. It's extremely complicated as to how certain of the regulatory agencies view that, but it's really not like we're going to build a new mine or we're going to double or triple production. We certainly aren't going to do that. It's to just maintain the current operations at the current tonnage rates. Just to go back to the comments, is that when we acquired the Cloud Peak assets, we didn't bring their balance sheet over. We didn't bring anything from the pre-existing company. So there really isn't any. Our 2019 profits that our net income, are based strictly on our activities at the Navajo mine, the Four Corners power plant, our other activities at the Navajo mine, plus the ownership of the Cloud Peak assets for approximately the last 2 months of the year. And they contributed, the last 2 months, contributed positive results. As far as, just to reiterate, the first quarter or 4 months of this year have been quite difficult. We're in a negative situation, but again, we were able to cash flow maintain operations. Is that we actually probably performed better than any of our peers during that time frame. We have some peer comparison analysis that we can share, but we fared probably during the first 4 months better than many of our competitors or peers in the business. And again, I want to reaffirm the month of May. The operations were all 4 operations were profitable. You can state that they were in the black, and is that this month is looking the same, and we're seeing in our forecast and our projections that the rest of the year we should be on upward slope as far as profitability. Chairman McLaughlin, I hope that answers some of Delegate Slater's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Speaker Damon, we defer to you.
I'm okay. I'm listening. Once I drop out, it's going to stop right there. I call him. My comment.
Honorable Yellow Hair. Honorable Yellow Hair. Can you put your phone off mute?
I did. I'm sorry.
It's okay. All right. Honorable Slater. You had a follow-up?
Thank you, Speaker. And thank you for the answers, NTEC leadership. So with respect to those permits, have they been continued to be approved, or have there been hiccups in them if they're about continuing the existing operations? And if they're not being approved or being slowed down, what are the reasons for that? And are they related to the current status of the bonding and the other permits? And then if the board, and this isn't any sort of attack or accusation or anything, but it's for transparency for our people, because there's historically been a lot of opacity and that has definitely been communicated to many of the people on the call regarding compensation within all of our enterprises. And that goes back to what value is being created for the people. It's appropriate to compensate people if they're helping to expand the wealth and prosperity of the nation. And in this instance, how much of this everything is going fine and moving forward will come back to Navajo. And we're hearing about these 5-year payment plans to the counties, to the states, maybe to the feds. Those are funds that are not coming back to the Navajo Nation. So when the acquisition was going forward and there was consideration and debate among the council, there were commitments or projections made by NTEC regarding revenue contributions to the nation. And I would like to know, is NTEC still able to honor, or do they think that their projections presently are aligned with those past ones? And if not, what are the factors that may contribute to that? And what might new projections be? I think they were looking at like a 10-year time period.
Thank you, almost later. Is there any other members of Naabik'iyati committee that would like to raise their comment? Honorable Eugene So. Let me go ahead and give you the floor.
Hello. I have a crazier question than all my colleagues. That we love so much Mr. Donald Trump more than our family. If we put him back in there, I guess the coal mine keep going. My question is there anything that's going to happen if he does lose, which is never going to happen, but if he does lose, what will happen to the coal mines within the United States? Are there any plans or anything that you guys are looking forward to? What can also your alter what's going to happen? Because I remember he did a lot of executive orders, Mr. President, so we can have coal or others that we can dig out of the earth. So that's my question, and I was wondering where we're really headed to with all these coal mines. And I would like to really sit down and start doing some understanding, with our thinkers, and try to find out what the benefit is in regards to human life, health-wise, and also what the coal is being used for right now at this time. That's my question. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin, to you and your team there, questions from Honorable Eugene So and Honorable Slater.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Thank you, Delegate Slater, for your comments and your questions. I think that you touched on an apt point in terms of you'd like to know and receive an update on the expected contributions from the nation. I think we as a team should review and update, if necessary, those projections, and maybe this is something we could send to the council as a part of the update that Honorable Delegate Crotty had raised in terms of providing economic or financial update to members of the council. This may be wholly appropriate for that request there. Bernard, would you please touch on Delegate Slater's permitting questions, and also follow up with maybe an answer to Honorable So's question in terms of whether or not a change in the leadership, namely the political party of leadership, was a part of any of our analysis, or is it a part of our forecast?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable delegates. Honorable Slater, on the permitting question, I think it's very positive news on that front. There are an enormous number of permits and licenses that any mining operation needs to maintain. These can be as broad as communications licenses with the FCC, water quality, blasting, across the gamut to the mining permits themselves. The good news is that the vast majority of all of those licenses, permits, et cetera, have transferred, and we are not seeing issues across the board with respect to our status or any difficulties in working with the respective state and local agencies. So that's sort of at the very granular, day-to-day ground level with respect to being able to maintain our operations. So we have no concerns with respect to whether there will be any delay or interruption in our ability to operate or to continue to mine. Of course, I will certainly acknowledge, there is the big top-level transfer of the permits that need to occur. That will take place as soon as we have our bonding in place. But again, we are operating lawfully and continuing as a contract miner under those existing licenses. I think with respect to sort of the question about the political climate, the delegates may recall when we made our original presentation on the acquisition of the Cloud Peak assets that we had intentionally taken an extremely conservative approach with respect to trying to predict the future of the coal market, particularly the domestic coal market. So we are not relying on a particular political climate of one kind or another. It is always an uncertainty. It has always been an uncertainty. We projected based on actually less than current the current tonnage estimates that Cloud Peak was operating under. And we also had anticipated in our projections, relying again, oftentimes in many cases on third-party market projections, the eventual closure of a number of coal-fired plants. So again, that's not to say that there cannot be something that would happen with a change in administration that would make the coal market far more challenging. But at present, we tried to not rely on a positive or negative political environment one way or the other with respect to coal. As far as the uses of coal, the primary use of the coal was for the generation of electricity, both here in the United States and also in Japan and Korea. We are actually have already entered into agreements with the University of Utah to begin to support their efforts to research alternate uses of coal besides generation. And we have been approached by a university consortium in Wyoming for the same purposes. But at present, obviously, the overwhelming use of coal is for the generation of electrical power. And then there is also, although we don't operate in that market, coal with respect to metallurgical coal that is used for productions of steel and other commodities. So hopefully that's answered the questions.
Thank you, Bernard. Speaker Damon.
Speaker Daniel, so follow-up question.
All right, Chairman, so go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Oh, that last statement where you are a contract miner, that term, what do you mean? Does that mean you own the mine or you don't? Or are you just the operator of extracting the coal? That part, it's and if it is, and in that case, does that exist in every one of the mines that was recently acquired? And then, just like the Navajo mine, Bistai Fuels actually is the miner. Is that the same type of arrangement that you're talking about? So that's the part that I really think we need to hear about. Thank you.
Speaker, this is Delegate Charles Newton. I have a follow-up question as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With no one else in the queue, go ahead, Madam Chair.
Speaker, just for clarification, Mr. Masters and also Mr. McLaughlin, so the purchase price included a $73 million tax debt that we acquired. And I know that you did mention that some of this information would be shared at our shareholders meeting on Saturday. But just to be clear, I will be sharing that information with council. I understand that most of this is confidential, but as my sister Amber Crotty stated, this information as shareholders belongs to the people. It belongs to the delegates to have this information. And I know you did make several statements about how some of these reports would be provided on Saturday. But again, just for clarification, we, as in the Navajo Nation, acquired a $73 million tax debt that we are paying to either a state or county. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, thank you. That follow-up questions by both of my colleagues, Madam Chair and Honorable Chairman Daniel. So let me go ahead and refer that back to you, Mr. McLaughlin, and then your team members who help assist as some of those questions were directed towards them.
Thank you, Speaker Damon. Clark and Bernard, to help us, you maybe answered Chairman So's question regarding contract mining. And then Bernard, if you would please answer Madam Chair Charles Newton's question regarding outstanding tax liability or outstanding tax.
Chairman McLaughlin, this is Clark Mosley. Let me address the question from Honorable Delegate Soul. Is that the statement that Mr. Masters made about contract miner? It's really a point that's used by the regulators in a acquisition when there is a selling party. In this case, the Cloud Peak assets have all the permits underneath their name. And for the continued operations of the mine, the acquiring party steps in. And during that time frame, they operate as the contract miner underneath the permit. And what I'm talking about is the surface mining permit underneath the Surface Mining Reclamation Act rules. And they operate and they own the mine. Both items are true during the time frame until the permits can be transferred. When you acquire an asset, the permits, the surface mining permit is not automatically transferred. It goes through a review period, a process period, and then the posting of the bonds. And once all that is in place, the permit gets transferred, and then we revert to we no longer are in the eyes of the regulators a contract miner underneath the Cloud Peak permits, but are now the owner and operator underneath the NTEC permits. The Navajo mine, NTEC owns 100% of the Navajo mine. And in our coal supply agreement for the Four Corners plant, when NTEC acquired the mine from BHP, and NTEC was a newly formed company, the owners of the power plant wanted to be assured that they would receive coal, and they placed in the coal supply agreement terms that for a period of time, NTEC would not be the operator of the mine, that it had to engage a reputable miner to be approved by the owners of the power plant. And that's the reason why North American Coal and its subsidiary Bisti Fuels is the contract miner at Navajo. But again, NTEC owns Navajo. So we own all of the Cloud Peak assets, but also is it in the interim period until we get the bonds and the final surface mining permits are transferred to NTEC, we operate as a contract miner. I will defer to Mr. Masters to talk about all the pieces of the purchase which were part of the bankruptcy proceedings.
And Chairman McLaughlin, if you could remind me again that the additional question from Delegate Charles Newton, I want to make sure I address that.
Honorable Delegate Charles Newton specifically asked to confirm the tax amount in the purchase agreement regarding the Wyoming and Montana mine.
Thank you. So again, that is when you look at essentially the acquisition price for the assets. Speaking of this tax liability, that's essentially what it is. It is part of the purchase price of the acquisition that we have paid to acquire these assets. It is, very similar to assuming debts that the company might have had at the time we acquired it. So this was part of the consideration that we were willing to pay in order to acquire the assets. So it just goes towards the total amount owed. And in our case, we have the benefit, instead of having to pay that amount up front, be able to pay it over a period of time. And as I mentioned, in almost entirely interest-free. So again, while we do have that obligation, it is one that we are able to easily manage. As far as the additional assets, and I'll simply, I think Mr. Mosley gave exactly the answer on the contract miner, and I apologize if I injected confusion. It is very much just the method by which mine permits are transferred when they are sold and acquired. There is a very lengthy time period, even in the best of circumstances, to complete the regulatory review to allow the transfer of those permits. So this is the commonly used, almost uniformly used procedure to allow the mine to continue to operate while the permits are being transferred. And that's it.
Chairman McLaughlin, let me just add, I believe Delegate Charles Newton also wanted to know what was all the rest of the components of the purchase price. And in addition to assuming the liabilities for the taxes, we also assumed $20 million of accounts payable from the previous owner. We have worked with those vendors that certain amounts were owed prior to the closing on the bankruptcy. We've worked out finance terms with those vendors, and they continue to supply us ongoing. So you add that $20 million, and then there was a payment of cash of about between $15 to $16 million at close. So that's the three major components of the purchase price to acquire approximately $500 million of assets, comprised of land, coal supply agreements, and surface mining equipment and facilities.
Thank you. Speaker Damon?
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah, here, Speaker Damon.
Does that conclude your response?
It does, sir.
Okay, good. All right, with that, colleagues, I don't have anybody else in the queue. With that, there's nothing else, no further questions. Going once, going twice, going
just
three.
For clarification, are these questions for the operational presentation? Are we still going to, talk about the P&M issues? I just want clarification.
That's up to you. That's up to the request, Madam Chair. Right now, I have no request to hear anything further. I sent it back to the committee to act, and right now there's been no request to continue that conversation.
Well, Speaker, I would like to request that we continue the conversation regarding the PNM deal. I think it's really important that my colleagues understand this deal because it's information that needs to go back to the people. Thank you.
Hey, with that, we can continue on then down to McLaughlin onto the PNM deal.
Thank you. I think at the urging of the Department of Justice and Legislative Council, both have requested, we absolutely concur and agree that this portion of the conversation should be an executive session, sir.
Oh, sorry. I was talking to myself there. It's up to the body if we go for the executive session. Is there a motion?
Speaker, before we talk about that motion, I guess just for the record, P&M had offered that the share of for the record, and the nation declined. And so I guess that's where P&M is now reaching out to NTEC. And that's just a matter of record because we had listened to the presentations at last, I think it was in the period August to October. at the After 5 meetings with OPVP, where members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council, certain members attended those presentations. Thank you.
That again, colleagues, they can give an overview of what if this doesn't pass, and discuss whatever questions that we have in this regular session. But I leave it up to you. Again, as a request from not only their attorneys, because of confidential information, they're wanting to give a presentation on the ongoing, I guess, I don't know if it's negotiations or update between the relationship between Navajo Transitional Energy Corporation and PNM, a utility company out of New Mexico. So with that, I did ask earlier that there was a motion.
I'll motion, Speaker. This is Delegate Charlton.
Okay, there's a motion, second by Honorable Eugene. So with that,
Speaker.
Vice Chair Walker.
Yes, Speaker, though, colleagues, presenters, we are in a Naabik'iyati work session mode. We're not in a committee meeting where we can enter into executive session by a motion and a second and a vote. If we are in a work session mode, that's more informal, although it's on the record, but more informal. Can you verify what we're about to do, Speaker? Thank you.
Yes. There has been precedence for to get information, whether that be confidential or sensitive information, to members of Naabik'iyati committee, and there has been precedence in doing that, to giving that information in executive session. I can have Office of Legislative Counsel elaborate on that even further, but this has been done before prior, Honorable Vice Chair Walker. And this would actually be a time frame, and in this case, both NTEC and seems Department of Justice has recommended, due to the fact that there might be confidential information. I don't know if there's non-disclosure agreements, but that's information that's privy to an update that's at this time is going to be recommending all this information back to the Navajo Nation, Naabik'iyati committee. So, Miss Dana Barbara, I don't know if you're on the line, are you? Anybody from Office of Legislative Counsel?
This is Mariana Khan from the Office of Legislative Counsel, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Ms. Khan, I don't know if you have a recommendation, but again, we're going into executive session during the Naabik'iyati work session. I just wanted to clarify that there has been precedence in this before, due to the fact that there's sensitive information that might be precedence to getting that information out to members of the Naabik'iyati committee.
Mr. Speaker, I do not know personally of the past precedent. However, I do know that the Department of Justice, it is their recommendation because of a particular confidential agreement. obtained. And if I would like to defer to for more information on that particular type of agreement to
Okay. Thank you, Speaker. Everyone know that the nation does have a non-disclosure agreement in place with P&M. And that really NDA, which is even that bit of information being shared in a public setting would violate the terms of our non-disclosure agreement. In terms of their end. Thank you.
Ms. Khan, I think one of the questions, I'm wrong, Vice Chair, is that because we are in Naabik'iyati committee work session, is that allowable to go into executive session within this parameter? No, as a work session. Because we're not in a committee meeting.
Of a legal meeting should be more and just being careful, Speaker.
And again, I refer, if there's no, I know there's not specifically any challenges in committee setting because we're not in a committee right now, but precedents, I know, in the last council, even I do believe in the 24th Navajo Nation Council, we went into executive session when we first got in back in February and March 19, regarding and we did do that. It has been precedence here in doing. Look to Office of the Legislative Council for that recommendation. But then you're referring back to any committee rule.
Yes.
We're not.
Work sessions are a little more informal, so.
Yep.
Work sessions are a little more informal, so I believe you guys have voted before, but I don't think a vote is necessary because it's a work session.
I will take the vote though, and the reason why is because this is a procedural move, and I'm moving forward with that as the chair of the work session. So there's a motion, there's a second to move forward by Madam Chair Charles Newton, second by Honorable Chairman, Honorable Eugene. So that.
Speaker.
There's no further. Mr. Smith.
Speaker. Yes. I'm looking at the rule book. Rule 22 is the vote. Rule 23 is executive session. So which one are we looking at?
Or not?
If we're looking at Rule 22, it's just a vote. If we're looking at Rule 23, that's called executive session.
Manuel, is that Rule 23?
No, it is Rule 22. Rule 22, executive session.
Unless you're looking at rule.
Unless he's looking at
are you sure you're not looking at council rules of order?
Yes, I am. Page 13 of 14, Rule 23 is executive session.
We're not looking at council rules of order. We're looking at the committee rules.
Committee rules.
There's a difference between committee rules and council rules.
And Speaker Damon, how long are we going to be in executive session?
That's Madam Chair Charles Newton. How long is the executive session?
Speaker, I'll defer to the presenters because I'm not sure how much information they have to share.
Mr. McLaughlin?
I mean, we can do the presentation. I think we had 20 minutes with RDC. I think we can do it within 20 minutes fairly quickly if we need to, if that's a concern.
What we can do is 20 minutes no longer in the presentation, and is everybody good with no longer than 40 minutes? So it would be an hour. Madam Chair.
1 hour is fine, Speaker, if that's good with.
Okay. No longer than an hour. Honorable Chairman Henia.
Okay, because I'm going to put up some blood oxygen on the so we should be done within an hour.
All right. Thank you. With that, there's a motion and a second, no longer than an hour due to the sensitivity of this information. We're going into executive session. There's a vote. Ms. Karen Doki, go ahead. If Karen is not on, Manuel.
Honorable Elmer P. Begay. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. Honorable Paul Begay. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton.
Green.
Honorable Nathaniel Brown.
Did you get my vote?
Yes. Honorable Eugenia Charles Newton voted green. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Herman M. Daniels, Jr. Honorable Pernell Halona.
Halona votes green.
Honorable Halona votes green. Honorable Vince James.
I forgot me.
Honorable Amber Kanazba Crotty.
You forgot Henio. I vote green.
Honorable Jamie Henyo votes green. Honorable Mark A. Freeland. Honorable Carl Slater.
Delegate Slater, green.
Honorable Eugene So.
I vote green.
Honorable Ricky Nez. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Raymond Smith Jr.
Green.
Honorable Smith votes green. Honorable Wilson Stewart Jr.
Green.
Honorable Stewart votes green. Honorable Daniel E. So.
Daniel So votes green if there are no more Freudian slips.
Honorable Edmund Yazzie.
For the record, Daniel So voted green.
Honorable So voted green. Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair.
Honorable Jimmy Yellowhair votes green.
Honorable Yellowhair votes green. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr.
Thomas Walker votes green.
Honorable Walker votes green. Honorable Edison J. Wanika. Honorable Elmer P. Begay.
Green.
Honorable Begay votes green. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. Honorable Paul Begay. Honorable Nathaniel Brown. Honorable Herman M. Daniels Jr. Honorable Vince James. Honorable Amber Kanazbakrati. Honorable Mark A. Freeland. Honorable Charlene So. Honorable Otto So. Honorable Edmund Yazzie. Honorable Edison J. Wanika. Mr. Speaker, you have 11 in favor and none opposed.
Okay, with that, motion to go into executive session, colleagues. I do believe that Chief of Staff sent that information out for the executive session. Everybody has received that. If you haven't, please text Chief of Staff or myself. I can send that information to you on how to get into executive session. To everybody out there, we will be going into executive session for the duration of no longer than 1 hour. The time now is 4:50 p.m. Please, everyone, jump on the other line now. Yeah. We will be back on this line at 5:50 p.m.
Speaker, I saw the email. I'm just wondering if that code is correct. Usually the code that we use is either, what was it?
This is a private. This is a new line. This is a private new line for executive session.
The code only has 5 digits. Is the reason I'm questioning.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's good.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Just so everyone's aware, if there's an unknown number, it will be eliminated from the call.